this table.
Good morning, everybody. I see many faces here to whom I owe a debt of gratitude for some helpful thoughts while I suffered with my
I mean, we could all be really cozy and
tennis
Yeah,
triumph.
we really
Why don't we
could.
all just sit in a big?
Well, I could move closer now. Well, if I sit here, then I can see all of you. So thank you all for celebrating my tennis shot. I hope you all know that the shot was in. And that's far more important than what happened to my arm. I'm now halfway mobile and will be
That's great.
out and about, but I cannot tell you how much I appreciated everyone's concern. Thank you. I thought today, and I've thought about it more than it may seem because I didn't send out thousands of pages to read. I thought we'd just talk a little bit about a couple of issues, and when we seem to be running out of gas on the first, we'll move to the second. My list in the email, I started off with I think, the elections. Is that the first one on the list? So let's start there. Just any reaction to the Virginia and New Jersey elections. The truck driver who's now unseated the New Jersey president of the state senate. Can you believe that? Good for truck drivers.
Okay, well, let me start with my analysis is the Democrats have to move a little more to the middle. The Democrats have to move a little more to the middle, and the Republicans have to move a little more to the middle, because people want steady legislature, not to be passing crazy stuff. They really feel more comfortable. Whether it's Republican or Democrat, that's what they're voting for.
Thank you.
There's a muddle in the middle.
Sorry, Gordon.
I say,
Hold on.
I think there's a muddle in the middle.
A model in the middle?
Yes.
Will you explain muddle?
Confusion, a lack of coordinated sense of purpose. And I think that the total lack of cooperation between the two parties reflect the confusion that exists in the public, and I call it a muddle.
Very good. I like that concept. Sometimes I think of a model being people are bumping into each other in the middle. Sadly, I think this model is not quite like that. They've just retreated so far to the edge. The bipartisan infrastructure bill attracted not a single Republican vote. It passed by the 50% majority after, 19 or something, yeah, 69. So 19 senators helped craft the bill. And the Democrats do the same thing. It's 100% against or for, 100% against or for, and that's just crazy. Nothing's that, at least I haven't ever seen anything that clear cut. Other comments on the election?
Well,
Ken?
besides the more prominent governor's races in Virginia and in New Jersey, which everybody has read about, apparently the resentment against, I'll call it progressives, and the school teachings, the school board of education around the country, not just those prominent ones, have been really a message that should be taken to heart by the Democrats.
Thanks, Ken. I really think that's true. Gary Chartrand has rescheduled. You all know he had COVID. That's why I had to cancel. And he's rescheduled for the 3rd of December, which I think is the Friday. If not, it's the 4th. The Friday of that week. And I'd like to just share some thoughts about education in that election. I think several things are going on. One of them is simply the exhaustion with COVID. A lot of the parents who McAuliffe said have no business talking about education, and that statement was used over and over again, probably taken a little out of context, but nonetheless he said it and set it up. But for moms who've been self-educating their children or homeschooling their children, if not the whole period of time, then episodically as kids were sent home on quarantine and then brought back and sent home again on quarantine, they were exhausted teaching and also deeply involved in the education of their children, and absolutely had a right, and feel they had a right to share their views on it. And to have anybody say, you don't have a right to talk to me about education, be it the teachers union, the school boards, or just a nice teacher, was especially offensive, if you understand what I'm trying to say, to parents who just had this 1.5 year long experience with educating their children directly, more so than they had before. Exhausted that schools were not reopened, and angry about that, angry with the school boards. Sometimes, and I suspect if any of us had been on the school board, and you're sitting there saying, I have this strange disease which has killed some people, and I want to be clear about that. 748,000 people, more than all our wars combined. I mean, this is 1,200 people, 1,248 people per day, the average the last 7 days. It's serious business. When I talk about that number to some people, they say, oh yeah, those numbers are exaggerated. I said, cut them in half, I don't care. It's a hell of a lot of dead people. So, I'm a school board member, and I've got a disease that's quite clearly deadly. Do I keep the kids in school? Or do I protect them and bring them home? In a way, I hope I err on the side of protecting the kids. And yet I know that angers the parents who either lose their jobs, lose the income from their jobs because they're staying away from them, are burdened with educating and taking care of their children. That's a real dilemma. I don't know who you blame for a virus. That's one thought. Another thought is this thing we've talked a lot about, CRT. And you've heard me say, and you've heard people on the stage say, CRT is not being taught to 4th graders. And it's just absolutely true. But I think most people know that, even those who are angry about it. But CRT is simply code for the way race is being taught to my children doesn't make me happy. And I'll use the words or the letters CRT to describe that, and that allows some people to say, well, that's technically not true. It's not true. But how do we teach children about race and racial difference? And or even should we? Should we just let them grow up and figure it out? John?
Well, I certainly don't.
Hang on.
I think you need one.
Yeah, but I love one. I don't think ever you should think that somebody else should be teaching your children how to deal with race and thoughts about race. I mean, if there was ever anything that you would not just say that that's your prerogative, it's not. It's something as delicate as race. And to begin with, when you call it CRT, I don't know how many people in here could give a cogent definition of CRT, but I can't. And I've been struggling with it now for about a year. And I can't still sit down and write 3 or 4 sentences that would tell me what CRT is. And when you put that out into the public, and they think that this must be terribly important because it's so much in the news, and they're teaching my child that, and I don't even know what it is. Of course you're going to object to it. And
But John, are you saying that parents should be responsible for dealing with their children's education about race, and therefore the school should stay out of it? Or are you saying,
No, you can't keep anybody out of it. I mean, this is a pervasive thing, racism and race. We face it every day. And, but parents are the people who are going to ultimately influence their children one way or another. I mean, some children react against parents' teaching. Others are so tied to it that they can't ever divorce themselves from it. But it is something that parents don't want to relinquish completely, as the debates in Virginia seem to indicate they might do.
thanks, John, I always love it when you share. We'll go first to Jeannie.
Since racism is unquestionably endemic in this country, leaving it to parents is a terrible, terrible reaction. And I think that all children should be taught facts about how races have been treated during periods in the United States. And one of the problems that racism continues is because it is handed down generation after generation after generation. But if children are not taught facts about what actually happened, it's going to continue forever and ever.
Thanks, Jeannie. I just want to quickly check with John. Is that radically different from what you said?
Well, it seems to be absolutely opposite in a way to what I said. But I, in spite of what I said, I agree with Jeannie.
I thought you said everyone is responsible.
I think that we all are, and you can't teach your children everything. They're going to learn everything that's taught at school, one way or another, and you have to mesh that with common sense and with your own sense of right and wrong. But factual history is what we really want. And I'm not sure that we all have all that factual history. I hope that what I know is true, or what I think is true. But I think what we really all want is to have racism taught in a factual way. I mean, I lived through the Jim Crow era pretty thoroughly and pretty well enmeshed in it. And I know as well as anyone how horrible, anyone who's white that is, how horrible that was. And I felt that very deeply even as a 7th and 8th grader in school. So I don't think I disagree with you at all, but I don't think you want to say that the school has the total right to teach your child what's right and wrong about our feeling about the black race in particular.
Thank you. I'm just trying to find agreement in that thing. But maybe I can say that the principal primary role, the first role, should be the parents. But I worry about the passing on, generation to generation, of the misunderstandings. And therefore, I think it's a joint thing. Carolee? Thanks, John.
Well, two things. Number one, my granddaughter teaches in a multiracial school in Greenwich Village. Am I okay?
Yeah,
okay? Two votes? And I asked her about critical race theory, and she said they don't teach that as a formal method. But they've always taught about different cultures, because of course they have different cultures sitting in the classroom, and it's quite different. My concern is that I heard on news on the radio yesterday that there's an epidemic of teachers quitting because of what's going on with the school boards and because of what's going on with parents trying to tell teachers what they should be teaching. And the other thing that came to my mind, I don't know if all of you remember this, but when I was in college, I took a sociology course, and in this book, we read about the internment of the Japanese. I never knew about it. I never had heard about it when I was growing up until I read about it in this book. And that's, I think, a very good example of critical race theory. The government hid it, and we didn't know anything. The United States hardly knew about it. Excuse me. Maybe people in California knew about it because people were removed from their homes. But the rest of the country really didn't know. And I think that's an example of how that has to be taught in schools.
Thank you, Carol. And I think the point here is the action of the government. The CRT, as I understand it, is a study of official actions that create or increase racial differences. The laws that redline neighborhoods for insurance purposes or federal housing program support, literally written in the law, not for African Americans. The action of moving Japanese, I knew about it because they moved them, among other places, to southern Idaho where I lived, was a government action. It wasn't anything in the society. It was an official action that happened with racial. Yeah. And so when you talk about a governmental action, that could be under the rubric of critical race theory. Thanks, Carol. Sally Ann?
I just want to say that muddle in the middle, it's too bad that we have a muddle in the middle or muddle getting to the middle. Because in the middle, it seems to me, what should be taught is kindness to all people with perhaps knowledge of their cultures. In Montessori schools, for example, every holiday is celebrated. They're non-denominational, but they study the culture of different peoples, and many of those different peoples are in classrooms in some schools. So they might have, I mean, just last night I was reading something about Diwali. Well, it comes up on my cell phone, Diwali. And I looked at Bob and I said, today's a holiday, it's Diwali. What is Diwali? What am I missing there? And it's a very, very important holiday in India, maybe the most important day of the year. And it's a beautiful celebration of candles and so forth. And the candles are meant to represent light and the dispelling of darkness. So I said, well, that's lovely, happy Diwali. And, it sounds like a nice thing to me. So years ago, we're all so afraid of change. Change is very threatening, I think, to all of us, to all people. And years ago, there was a great conversation about should sex be taught in schools. And people were terribly up in arms about that. And probably the answer, again, is no, the parents should teach you. My parents never mentioned it, ever. So I was not.
My parents never did, so.
and I hope my parents never did it either. But the point is, I never learned about that. Or, when I finally did, it was from other classmates or other friends. And it was quite a deadly shock. And I'm thinking that, what if your parent is anti or not a believer that the Holocaust happened? Or what if your parent is a racist pig? That's going to be taught to the child. And so what if your teacher fits that description? I mean, it's quite tragic what we can be taught, what we teach each other in life. So what I'd like to see in that middle is a coming together of teaching kindness to all people, learning about cultures, learning the facts, learning what we suspect is the truth. And again, I agree with Dr. John, what is the truth? We don't know, but most of us agree there was a Holocaust, and most of us agree there is racism. So somehow coming to the middle and teaching and encouraging our teachers to teach kindness, not in a religious way or a particular cultural way, but just kindness to all people. It's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. But we don't know who we're getting as the teacher, and we don't know who we're getting as the parents, so this is always going to be a problem. I've gone on too long, but I wish you would explain critical race theory as we have defined it in this classroom, and perhaps that would take it a little bit away from kindergarten.
Well, thank you very much. Ken, did you have
I just
something?
wanted to go back on something Carol Lee said. The one problem she did not identify were the damn unions, the teachers' unions. Now, they become just so aligned with the Democratic Party. Well, the teachers can't be Democrats, but the unions, the union heads, are so democratic in everything they profess, including the fact that they ended up, through the White House, politicizing the Department of Justice and coming after anybody who complained, seriously, of course, at Board of Education meetings. And they're somehow, their power in closing the schools last, in 2020, it was proper to close the schools. In 2021, it's debatable for young kids. The statistics aren't all there as far as how the kids are reacting to COVID. And now there's a penicillin, but there's a new prescription for them from Pfizer.
Yeah.
And so the picture is so big, that the problems are so many faceted, that but you can't leave out the unions. They're a problem.
Thank you very much, Ken. I'm going to say, as I've often said before, I've never managed a union shop, and I say that after 40 years in business in construction and energy. And I'm frankly not proud of that. And I'm not proud of it because I think there has been a legitimate role of unions. That said, the fact that the teachers' unions have had such a major role in this whole debacle cannot be ignored. And I don't think it's just that they're taking a Democratic side. They're taking a very disruptive side on a subject that is, as we've all been talking about, very sensitive at this time. And I think it played a big role on Tuesday, but we ain't seen nothing yet. And state after state after state, the issue of closings in 2021, big one. Closings every time anybody has a hiccup or a threat of a hiccup. Again, I'm not sure that's, although I think the unions are a big part of it, I think the school boards played a big part in it too, and they're not, other than the fact that they're afraid of the unions, maybe. I'm sorry, Jenny?
Are you kidding?
Thanks, Karen. Yeah.
As I listen to this, I'm reminded of an experience of my own. Fortunately, my parents brought me up to experience everything on my own, and I did experience all types and kinds of racial problems growing up in Philadelphia. And I knew how my parents felt, but they didn't put that on me. However, as an adult, when my husband was being transferred to Jamaica, the company, Alcoa, sent me to a one-week school on understanding your prejudice and how things that you said that you didn't even realize was exposing you. Everybody has a prejudice, you do. And as soon as it comes into your territory, it shows up. And it was very educational. Now, what I'm saying is, we're saying, well, we don't like the teachers teaching this, and we don't want it left to parents at home to teach it because they might not have all the facts correct. What probably our schools should do is have special people that come in that are trained who know how to teach this.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. I'm going to come back to that because at the beginning of my work career, I was a sensitivity trainer because we were trying to implement the Civil Rights Acts of 1966 and 65 and 66. Part of our role was to integrate our company. And I joined with another black guy, or a black guy, because I'm not as black as he was. The black guy. And the two of us would do these sensitivity trainings around all the offices of the Boys and Girls Escape. I want to come back, though, for just a second, if I may, to Ken. is reference to the Justice Department and their designation of a group of parents as domestic terrorists. I think it was the phrase that was used.
That was like a perception. That was the union who said that.
No, it's actually the Justice
But
Department
they said it also.
said that they were no better than domestic terrorists. But the issue they were talking about wasn't race. That issue was masking. And what happened, and we've all seen it in the news, is that there was a school board meeting with teachers, and the union was at the school board meeting, teachers in the car, and angry parents were banging on the windows of the car and banging on the car and shouting, "I know who you are, and I know where you live." And those are really kind of nasty things to say to somebody or have said to you if you happen to be the person in the car. Is it domestic terrorism? I think not. I think that was an unfortunate use of words. But it was an issue that the law should be involved somehow. We should be able to go to a school board meeting or a parent-teachers meeting, get in our car and drive away freely. We shouldn't be subjected to threats and insults and banging on our door. But that wasn't race. That was masked. One of the important things about, I think, the issue of education, both Tuesday and as we go forward, it's not one thing. It's a whole complex. And I was impressed by these mothers who were talking about the anger they felt having been at home for 18 months. That wasn't about masks. It wasn't about race. It wasn't about teachers' unions. It wasn't about school board. It was a mother's frustration, a legitimate frustration. And if that continues, and I think it exists around the country, compare that to the Women's March on Washington in just January of this year. Was that the January of Trump's election? I forget. Was that the big?
I think it's Trump's election.
Was it so that was 4 years ago. More women marched in more cities than you could shake a stick at. And now, 4 years on, those same women are angry at Democrats. They're angry at anybody who closes the schools, particularly the school boards and unions. But coming back to does that make any sense? And everything gets conflated, and we say the issue is CRT. And I'll come back, Sally, into that. Or the issue is masking, or the issue is transgender bathrooms. In the schools that have the pick your bathroom, I don't know what they're called, men or women thing, that's men, women, men or women. I don't know that that's caused any riots. I suspect they're not used nearly as much as the threat we thought it was. But it is it's a big red flag issue. Bigger than, my point being, it's a bigger issue in the discussions than it is in fact. Going back to where do we teach facts? Now, does that make sense, by the way, this concept, the notion of conflating lots of issues and calling them one thing or another? It's just a complex group of issues around education. Sal?
I think the issues are deep, and I think they're primarily fear and control.
Thank you. That's probably true.
And fear of.
In anticipation, by the way, I'm going to move to another topic, if I may. In anticipation of Gary Chartrand's visit in 2 weeks, I'll say a couple things. He's very clearly Republican. He was appointed first by a Republican governor, Scott, and kept on by, I think maybe first Bush, kept on by Scott, kept on by DeSantis. He is extremely adamant about school choice and adamant about non-union. And I'm saying all that just so you'll know where he's coming from. I suspect he'll share that. I think he was very clearly a participant in the governor's decision to ban CRT teaching in our schools. Not even clear what that meant at the time. Nonetheless, we're not going to teach it. But he's also, I think, an extremely smart, extremely successful maybe the most successful person in the Duval, St. Johns County area. I mean, Acosta's been a massive success. But it'll be interesting to hear what he says. That's his background. Can we go to another issue?
Let me just add something, George, that I come from a union family. My father was an electrician in the electricians union for 50 years, from age 15 to age 65. So I know you. I've been at union meetings. I had a contemporary card as an electrician's helper, and I found out this is not the business for me. I couldn't do it. But I went to union meetings, and I heard how they talk, and they are good, they accomplish. But you can go too far, and if you become look one way, from the blind is on, there's going to be problems. And so I classify the teachers union as a problem union. Not all unions, I think, are big problem unions.
I attribute, and it seems to me from everything I read, that it's hard to deny that the increase in wages for the working class from the period before the war up through 1967, 68, when union membership was at its highest in this country. But boy, oh boy, did working conditions and compensation for the common man, the working stiff, did those, all those benefits totally attributable to the power of the unions. And the fact that it stopped when union representation in the private sector has gone from that 38% down to the number I've heard most recently is 4% in the private workforce. Now it's 10 or 11% if you add in public workers. But it's a complex issue, but boy, oh boy, I think they were good for the country, good for the working class, the working and middle class, and it's a tragedy to see them, in my view. Let's talk about COP26. What is COP26?
What is it?
Environment.
It is the Conference of the Parties' 26th meeting. And the Conference of the Parties refers to the 1994 meeting on climate change. Is that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
Thank you. You didn't, I had a bigger mic faster than you. Sorry, I didn't see your hand go up. It was the Conference of the Parties 21, COP21, where the Paris Accord, 5 years ago, where the Paris Accord was signed. COP26 is going on today. In fact, today at COP26 is Youth Day. And students and Greta Thunberg, I'm sorry, I can't say her name, Thunberg, is the keynoter was the keynoter for this morning's meeting in Glasgow. The significance of that, I think, is fairly important. Have any of you followed what went on? I mean, other than the fact that Biden spoke on the first morning of COP26. Oh yeah, I think one of the sadly important things was there was a COP resolution to end coal mining and commit to ending generation of electricity using coal. Now I paid attention to that not just because I'm a former coal miner who then went into electricity generation using coal. The only major power not to sign the resolution on coal was the United States. And I think what's significant about that isn't just that there's in the general background reluctance to do so, but I think this time there was a very important vote on the infrastructure packages, which we could talk about next. Happens to be Joe Manchin. And for Biden to be in Glasgow on Wednesday morning and sign that accord banning coal would not have done any good in his effort to get Manchin to swing on infrastructure. China didn't vote for it either. China is now, by some measure, the largest polluter using coal. And a problem that
Oh,
China...
was China there?
I'm sorry?
Were they present?
They didn't attend, but I think they, Saudis, Russia, but their absence also meant they didn't sign that accord. I think Russia's a significant coal user for power generation too. But the Chinese complicate the thing because not only are there large numbers of coal-fired power plants in China, but under the Belt and Road program, they're building lots of coal-burning power plants in countries throughout Africa and Asia. Providing infrastructure and much-needed electricity, but using Chinese technology, and it's generally speaking coal technology. But I thought that was significant. Otherwise, what I think came out of COP26 is just a much greater consensus among the countries that the possibility of preventing dangerous climate change is slowly disappearing. We're not going to prevent it before we get to that 1.5 degree threshold, which all the scientists say we shouldn't reach, much less exceed. And in my mind, what that means, and I've said this before here, is adaptation to climate change is probably more important than efforts to prevent it. Amsterdam or Rotterdam, I forget which, has dealt with the sea level much higher than the city for decades using one of those movable
Dikes,
dikes, exactly, thank you.
and it's Rotterdam.
Rotterdam.
It's Rotterdam.
It's Rotterdam, thank you. How many, will that work for Miami or other coastal cities? Is there a way that they can keep the ocean, even if it's a foot or two higher than it should be now, or 4 feet higher? How much can the investments in infrastructure preserve those cities? I don't know. But I think following the science of climate change is important. Any comments on?
Well, COP26 did make progress on deforestation.
I think they did. That's a good point. Thank you. I think they did. Let's move from that to what was on my list?
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Are they going to vote on it today?
By itself?
Well, theoretically, there are going to be 2 votes today, but possibly even mine. I think what's interesting is I was watching it come in here is the insanity of our system. Do you know what the voting has been about since about 8:30 this morning? Motions to adjourn. And it doesn't matter which party it is. It happens now that the Republicans don't want to have this vote, so one after another, and I think they get 3 shots at it, and then they can't do it again. A Republican member of the House will vote to adjourn. And then they do a voice vote. Somebody raises their hand, so roll call. So you go through this madness of watching 100% of the Republicans vote to adjourn. They don't have enough votes. 100% of the Democrats voted not to adjourn. As soon as that's finished, the second person stands up and votes to adjourn. And that's taken place. We're now at 10:45. I'll bet a nickel if we had a screen here, there'd still be a screen showing the count on the current vote to adjourn. But when all of that is over, we're going to have votes theoretically on both BIF and BBB. We're starting with BBB, and I don't know whether she has the votes to prevail on that, and if so, whether it's going to be something the Senate will even stomach. Any comments?
Well,
Thanks, Karen.
they haven't even scored the bill yet by this Congressional Budget Office.
Oh, I thought they were scoring it today.
They just finished writing
They're voting.
it, so they just turned it over to the CBO to do it. So
But I worked at the city, we think we scored bills before they were written. Sure.
That's true. Well, they're voting before they know what it's going to cost.
They vote before they read it.
That's right.
Come on.
Right?
They don't have time to read it.
We all know they vote before they read it. Now, why argue about whether it's been scored?
Well, the other thing I'm curious about every time I hear about these folks, these are 1,000 plus, 2,000 plus paid bills. How many of you regularly read a couple thousand pages a day or even a week? Especially when you've got other things to do, other hearings to go to, and you're only working 3 days a week as it is, other than trying to get reelection. That's just madness to me. So even when people have said, well, they finished the bill, it's in writing, I'm not terribly convinced that a week later, everybody's read it. They're still voting on things they haven't read. But it is folly to think that they can score and vote in an informed way on a bill that is just now being printed, if that. Nonetheless, they're going to do it. And my guess is that the so-called moderates, who's the guy from New Jersey, I forget his name now, but he's the one most frequently they're saying two things. Number one, he doesn't want to see SALT continue, the state and local tax deduction limitation, which really hurts the northeastern states where many of you once lived. It really benefits us here in Florida. Ken?
Is he a senator?
No, he's a congressman.
Offhand, I don't know.
Gottheimer, I want to say, but I can't remember. Anyway, there is a group of moderate senators who are probably going to have expressed a feeling of voting no on BBB because they put back in paid family leave, I think, last night. Said 4 weeks paid family leave, and this SALT tax, so they've increased the deduction from 10,000 to 80,000, I want to say. And neither of those are going to be popular over the Senate side. So even if they do pass it, which means a group of crazy progressives, group of less crazy, in my view, moderates, get together and pass this thing, which almost certainly not going to be what Manchin has said he'll vote for. But in my tiny little head, I think it may be a smart move. Get the House to vote on that, and then they can vote on BIF, the infrastructure package, hard infrastructure package. It'll pass. Tonight, Biden will sign that. Tonight, the Senate will get the passed Build Back Better Act, and to some extent, what happens on that doesn't matter to a lot of people, because the hard infrastructure is now law. It's going to go forward. Elements of the Build Back Better, I suspect, will in some form or fashion get passed, but not in the form it's sent over to the Senate. Does that make any sense? If I could get the vote on BBB and I were Pelosi, that's exactly what I'd do anyway. And thus get the ball moving. And then when it gets over to the Senate, Build Back Better, Manchin and Sinema and probably some other senators can object to elements of it. They can trim the cost down to a cost that they like. They can take out things that are particularly offensive to them. Then it simply goes back to the House. My guess is if I were a House member and I had that bill come back at, say, 80% of what I wanted, it's not the whole pie, but it's a whole lot better than nothing at all. I'd pass that and make it law.
If I may, my issue with it is this. The infrastructure bill is a win-win for Biden and for everybody. But the other part of it, Speaker of the House Pelosi describes it as a transformational bill. How can a party that's not even They don't even have a mandate. They're not even in the majority in the Senate. It's even. How can one party make a transformational bill when they don't have really the backing of the country?
Well, there are polls that say, and you know polls are just deadly accurate, Ken.
Well, yeah, if you say, will you take $1,000 for this year? They're going to vote yes in the poll.
Thanks, Ken. It's a very, I'm so troubled when I hear the word transformational. I agree with you. If we had a 70...
That's what you described it yesterday.
Oh, yeah, if we had a 70, if the Democrats had a 70 vote majority in the House and 25 vote majority in the Senate, is that enough?
Yeah, that's plenty.
Then they could do transformational things. Tough to do transformational things at 50-50, barely. Sally, thanks.
I think words like transformational, a lot of this is about salesmanship. If people aren't reading the 2,000 words every other day or whatever they're meant to read, then how do you get anything done? I think you get stuff done by pure exuberance or pure pressure or whatever word you want to use. So transformation is simply a sales technique. She wants this to go through, so she says, this is transformational. I mean, that should excite people, perhaps, right? But those who are dead set on what they believe are not into that kind of transformation. It's difficult. So I think a lot of it is just pure salesmanship on the part of these people who are trying to, it's too much like a football game, which side is going to win. Nobody seems to be coming to that muddled middle to think about what is best for the country. I would love you to talk a little bit about, with this group especially, because we have a lot of women in this group, and I'm very curious as to why something like paid family leave would boggle the minds of people. I kind of just don't understand that. Talk about being kind and generous and good to, and my gosh, most of us believe in promoting family life and supporting family life and caring for life period from birth to, or even pre-birth in many instances, to death. Why are we not willing to help support that, to help these people? I believe in maternity leave, and I think most of us have experienced that, know how necessary it is. But I also believe in paternity leave. Nicholas Kristof wrote many years ago that until this country, or this world, considers women absolutely 100% equal to men, that we will never get over any prejudice. It starts there. And we have progressed, there's no question about it. But why shouldn't men come forward and help take care of the children they produce?
If I may, I don't mean to be the one speaking so much here, believe me.
Me either.
In the bill, they may pass a bill that has $1.5 billion or $1.7 billion. The paternity leave can be in that. I think it will be in that. So we're not speaking specifically against that.
Well, at first they were talking about
Paid family leave, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a Build Back America bill that's been reduced from 3.5 trillion to 1.7.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of money. It'll be in there.
But we started that first day, and it was not a very successful effort, but Charlie Goldsmith and I exercised that morning together, which is dangerous. And he said, let's put the $3.5 trillion bill up there and what the pieces of it are, and discuss which pieces this group to take out. What will we take out? Problem is that the way I put the pieces on the screen was the committee that was considering it was the very intelligent way to do it. But it seems to me that these are the kinds of discussions intelligent congressmen and women should have. What about child care for 2- and 3-year-olds? I suspect when the votes come in on this thing, even though in their heart of hearts, most congressmen and congresswomen on the Republican side would say, for heaven's sake, yes. paid family needs makes a lot of sense. Or even adult education through community college. A lot of people would say, let's get rid of this notion that you have to go to a 4-year school to be anything. Community college makes a lot of sense, and it increases the level of education for the bulk of the people who'd otherwise have no options beyond high school. Of course, let's do it. I think, anyway, most people would say that. I don't know. But I'll bet 100% of the Republicans will vote against it. And is that because they are not looking at the pieces? Maybe it's the sticker shock of $1.7 trillion, which sticker shocks me. It doesn't sticker shock me. I can't count that high. I have no idea what $1.7 trillion is. And I don't think any of them do, you know.
I didn't mean to talk so much either today, but I noticed some of the big talkers weren't here, so it's an opportunity.
Take your chance while you can.
Right.
Listen, we've only got about 5 minutes left. Did I have, Carolee?
I'm sitting here thinking about what's really going on in this country overall. We're living in a country where there are still people that don't believe the election was correct and that Joe Biden is really president. And I think this overall, it's like a fog over everything, that there are still people who don't believe this, and we still have obstructionists in the Senate and Congress, as you were saying, who probably in their heart of hearts believe in having child care and parental leave, etc., and maybe even junior college being free. We're one of the only countries in the world that don't have these things. It's just crazy. And meanwhile, there's this chaos overall that we still have people who don't even think the election is legitimate. So somehow it seems ridiculous to even talk about these smaller things when the larger things are looming overhead. And I don't know when they're going to stop.
Okay. Thanks, Carolee. I should say thanks for nothing.
Very pessimistic, you want to start.
I think we need some.
Let's go to
Neil.
Neil first, and right after Neil, we'll go to Joan.
When you talk about a trillion here, a trillion there, a trillion everywhere, we can't lose sight of the fact that this money is going to be spent over 10 years.
Very good point.
And the actual percentage that I've been reading is over 10 years, these dollars today represent around 2 or 3% of the gross national product of this country in the next 10 years.
And it's only half the feds.
It's not all being spent tomorrow. It's going to go over 10 years. That's all.
That's a very good point, and it's only half. Thanks, Neil. That's only half of what we're spending on defense. Joan?
I sit here and I think, when I hear that all the Republicans are going to vote one way on an issue and all the Democrats are going to vote in that way, the opposite way on an issue, these are people who are not thinking.
It can't be.
They can't be thinking what is right for the country, what is right for the people. They're thinking of what is right for themselves.
That's politics.
Thank you, Ross.
That's
Well, it
politics.
stinks.
It stinks, you're right. Motivation.
I agree. The unanimity, one side of the other just doesn't make sense. Did I have anything else on that list of issues I sent out in the email?
Could I just say one other thing?
Oh, yeah.
This is just a real personal thing. Gordon and I went up to visit our grandson who is immigrating to Canada. And he and his wife have a baby, and the baby was 3 weeks old. He is on 2-month paternity leave, and she's on 1 year maternity leave, and they both get paid, and she can even extend hers. And these kids are only 25 years old. And, you know, their life is it's so sweet to see them with that baby. They are unstressed. And you know how stressed our young people are when they have babies? Because they have to go back to work right away, their husband doesn't stay home. I mean, we're doing something wrong.
And are they paid by the government or by their employer?
I don't know that.
'Cause that's what, does anybody know
I
how
think it's by the
paid
government.
works?
I think it's by the government.
And is the payment the government makes the salary they would have been earning?
Yes, it's guaranteed.
She knows.
I know.
Oh, good. So, the mic over here.
Oh,
Speak your truth, Jenny.
yeah, right.
Our moderator.
Put the camera on yourself.
No, the real speaker. This is for I'm sharing.
Yes, these countries that have, for instance, Sweden allows you 15 to 18 months, and they allow for the mother, and they allow 6 months for the father when a baby is born. If you don't take all of that time, then you can collect it as you would be putting money in a savings bank. You are collecting that, and you must use all the unused weeks within 8 to 10 years, and then you can take a vacation. And the Swedish people,
But is that the government's money or?
government's money.
And is
The
it-
other thing, yes, and that's why you pay high taxes in Sweden, because the Swedish people believe, differently than most of us, that if you are wealthy, it is your responsibility to take care of those who are not. So the haves must take care of the have-nots. If you become a have, then you are responsible to take care of the have-nots when you're no longer a have-not. But here is what I want to really emphasize, though, with all of this. Oh, one other thing. You are guaranteed the job that you left will be there when you go back. Okay. What you really have to look at is the whole picture. And the whole picture is their education system. You don't have kids getting into university. Oh yeah, the universities are free. But I know how hard those kids work. Starting in 6th and 7th grade, they take tests that guarantee whether or not they can go into the college preparatory part. The next 6 years that they're in school, at the end of each year, they take very tough tests in order to stay in the gymnasium program, as it's called, to go in the next year. I know from living in Holland and having our kids live with a Dutch family that the gal that was in 9th grade that was working so hard studying, she told me that already since 7th grade, half of her class had been lost, that they couldn't make it. So when you get there to that 12th grade, oh yes, you get entrance into university, but you have earned it, and you have worked hard for it. And that's all part of this whole social picture, where everything is taken care of, that we look at and say, well, why don't we do this? But we don't have the whole system here. We need to have a better whole system.
Can I add to that? Okay, 1 second. May I add to that? Sorry. I just want to add to that. I want to quote a wonderful nun named Sister Joan Chittister, who's just a remarkable woman and has written remarkable books. And she has implied that our country tends to be, in general, very active in the whole notion of pro-birth, which indeed we see that. But she goes on to say we need to be not just pro-birth, but also pro-life. And the real definition of pro-life is once that child is born, what can we do to make life better for that child and the family?
Thank you very much. Neil?
Does anyone in the room know why Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, which was lauded when it was introduced and contained a lot of the sort of things we're talking about here, was almost a total failure?
It's almost a total.
Failure.
How is it a total failure?
Does everybody hear that question and understand it?
Repeat it.
let me just say, thanks very much for the question. It's one of the big personal issues in my life, because during that period, was the period that I was a sensitivity trainer at Boise Cascade, I thought that we'd knocked this racism thing in the head. Got that one.
It didn't actually work the way it was proposed.
But and all the other programs in the Great Society program that I thought made a lot of sense at the time, and here we are with almost the same set of issues, if not much worse. Clearly, that's 65. Are we 50 years on? And I'm telling you, the divisions, the division between white and black has grown, not diminished in that period of time, the economic division. What happened? And I've got an answer, and it's called the movement conservatism. Let's lower taxes, and let's cut services, and let's do so because that other system didn't work. The Great Society of Lyndon Johnson doesn't work when you cut taxes the way we have. And since, but that could be, I think, a very interesting and whole day or whole couple of days to talk about what that really cosmic, that transformational change since 1965, because it has been transformational. We are not even vaguely similar to the kind of society we thought we were creating in 1965. And that those actions, actions that were taken were not one party. There was a bipartisan support of virtually every program that Johnson proposed.
Well, that was
Impossible today.
Big difference.
Impossible today. But the concept of the New England Republican, Connecticut Republican, or Massachusetts Republican. My junior tutor at college was George Cabot Lodge. Ran against Teddy Kennedy in his first race for Congress. You know, and his father was Henry Cabot Lodge, the vice presidential candidate under Goldwater. But the lodges were, they cared as much about children and poverty as any Democrat ever hoped to. Where have those kinds of Republicans gone? I don't know.
If I may add, Johnson was the best compromiser that ever existed. He could take people that disagreed and bring them together to agree. And we don't have anybody today who seems to be able to do that. We need another Johnson.
But I thank you, Jeannie. I think you're dead right, but I think that the challenge of bringing people together is radically different today. Every time I think about Johnson having done everything in my power to get rid of him, he was perfect except for that one little tiny flaw of Vietnam. George W. Bush was really quite a good president except for that little tiny flaw of Iraq. It's just tragic that those things happen. We've run out of time. This sort of free-flowing conversation about current events is how this whole thing started. It's a smaller group, but we just sit around and talk about what's happening in the world today. Next week there will not be a meeting, unless maybe we want to have another meeting to prepare for Gary, who is coming the following week. What's your sentiment? Should we in part, I think it would be a good idea to have another deep dive into some of the education issues that Gary will talk about on the 3rd of December. How do you feel about that?
Why is there no meeting next week?
What?
Why had you planned no meeting next week? What was the reason? What was the reason for no meeting?
Give her the microphone.
Wow, what was the reason for no meeting next week?
Why can't we have a meeting next week?
Well, I think at one point the moderator had said he's tired.
Bob,
Neil.
he will obviously come with prepared
Ken and
remarks.
Sally Ann.
Yeah, I think he's going to have
Get a copy of those prepared remarks
Oh, no, that's not a bad idea.
and have those in our hands when he shows up in 2 weeks?
I'll talk to you, we're gonna try to have lunch next week, I'll talk to him about, let's have a meeting next week, I'll send out an agenda and maybe some material with my new, smaller brace, I'm reinvigorated. Listen, thank you all, it's been an interesting conversation, I'm happy we solved all the problems, and we're gonna send the video to Washington so they'll know what to do next.